It's important to understand that when building applications with Aurelia and ECMAScript 2015, I can create my own abstractions and my own modules, and I can use those components for my view models. I can even have them work with dependency injection in Aurelia. As an example, let's say that we don't want our view model to have intimate knowledge about how to go out and fetch the movies. We don't want the view model to know things like we use HTTP and this is the specific URL that we go to. I want to abstract that away a little bit. So in the www root folder, I'm going to add a new JavaScript file, and I will call this file moviedata.js. And the purpose of this file, or this module, will be to build some sort of abstraction that multiple view models can use to retrieve information about movies, to update information for a movie. I want this to be a wrapper around HTTP client and my web API. So if simple things like a URL change, I don't have to go through and change all of my view models. So I will export a class, let's call it movie data. And it will now be the responsibility of this class to talk to the HTTP client. So I'm going to import the HTTP client from Aurelia HTTP client. And ultimately, I will still want to inject the HTTP client. So I will also import the inject decorator from Aurelia framework. So let's inject HTTP client. That means I can have a constructor that takes an HTTP client instance, and I will save that off as a field in an instance of this class. And now I can start thinking about the API that I want this component to provide. It might provide things like the ability to save a movie and the ability to create a movie and get a movie by its ID. For right now, the only feature that I need is something that will get all the movies. So let's write a method called getAll, and this will essentially hide the call that we have here. So for right now, I will copy that code and paste it into movie data. But I do want to change up a few things. First of all, let's take this URL and let's create something called base URL. So it only appears in one place. So base URL will essentially be a private variable inside of this module, and it will have that string /API/movies. And now, if this component wanted to do some fancy caching, it could keep movies around as a field. But let's do the simplest possible thing that could work, which is just to return the movies that come back from a successful HTTP response. And now, over in my app, I no longer want to import HTTP client. I want to import this movie data class from my movie data module. And I do need to make one slight change here. Since this is a local module, that is not something that I installed with JSPM that is well known like Aurelia framework, I'm going to precede the module name with a /. That will tell the module loader that movie data, this module, is in the same folder as this app view model. And now let's add the decorator to inject movie data. By default, the DI container that Aurelia provides will treat the services and components that it instantiates as singletons. So there will be one instance of movie data for my application. And that's quite common in JavaScript applications to use singletons that way. There are some additional decorators we can look at later in the course. Some decorators that I could add to make this a transient component. That is, it's instantiated each time it is required. Now let's clean up our app view model a little bit. So this will be a movie data instance that comes into the constructor. I don't need a message anymore, and I will say this dot movie data equals that incoming movie data object. Inside of activate, I no longer need to do an http.get. Instead, I can just return this dot movie data dot get all, and there will be a response from that that provides me the movie. So I'll write a then with an arrow function that says given a parameter movies, this dot movies equals those incoming movies. And now, just in the interest of cleanup, we no longer really need change message. So let me remove that from the view model and just try to format this activate method a little bit so that all the code can fit on the screen at once. And that's pretty close. All we have left over here is a semicolon. And now let me save all my files and refresh the browser. And we can hope that this works again. And it does. We still get our 3 movies. But now we've seen just how easy it is to build our own component, like a movie data component that will encapsulate how to fetch and save movies. We can import that abstraction using ES 2015 module syntax. We can have an instance automatically injected by Aurelia. And this leaves us with nice simple code inside of our view model. Notice that I didn't have to do anything special to have the movie data component injected into my view model. I didn't need to configure the DI container explicitly. This is something the DI container can do by default. It can instantiate movie data for me when it finds that class symbol. But if I wanted to, I could add some explicit configuration code for the container and tell the container to instantiate a different component when someone asks for movie data. And we will look at more advanced Aurelia configuration in the next module of this course. For now, let's turn our attention back to the UI and try to make things a little bit prettier. From a UI perspective, you are free to use any CSS framework that you like with Aurelia. There's no restrictions or built-in dependencies for a specific framework. You can also use jQuery and jQuery plugins to help build your UI if you wish. You might want to wait until later in the course when we start looking at building custom elements before you start using jQuery, because it is a good idea to keep jQuery out of your view models. You can use jQuery from a component like a custom element or a custom attribute, because it's those types of components which have the responsibility of directly interacting with the DOM. We really want our view models to be free of explicit DOM manipulation code. All of the DOM manipulation that happens because I'm simply setting data and fields and properties inside of my view model and then using binding expressions to influence what happens in the DOM. Right now we're just building tables and putting text on the screen, but as we move through the course we'll also see things like adding animations and changing colors and changing CSS class names. So to reach that point and to demonstrate how you might include a framework like Bootstrap, let's add Bootstrap to the application. Bootstrap is actually one of those assets that I can install with JSPM. So JSPM can do a little bit more than just JavaScript libraries. And I can see from the output that JSPM has installed Bootstrap from GitHub. And I know that JSPM places everything that it installs into the JSPM packages folder. So if I look under GitHub, I should be able to find TWBS, Twitter Bootstrap, and it is inside of this folder where I will find the version of Bootstrap that is installed, and then a CSS folder, and it's inside of here where I can find bootstrap.css. There's also a minified version and a source map. I'm just going to take the full version, and back in our index page, let's add Bootstrap to the page. And Visual Studio has perhaps unhelpfully added both the CSS file and the minified file and the source map. I really just need a link to just the CSS file. It is a style sheet. Let's also give this page a title. I'll just call it Aurelia Movies. Save this file, and then the rest of our work will be in app.html. This is our app view. This is the template that Aurelia will pick up and insert into the DOM, where I have the Aurelia app attribute. And typically, when I work with Bootstrap, I like to have a nav section. So a nav element with the class navbar and navbar inverse to make it dark. And I'm using Web Essentials for Visual Studio 2015, which has the Zen coding abilities. So I can use this syntax where I want a div with a class of container fluid. This will allow my header to stretch out across the screen. And inside of here, I want my navbar header. And this is the place where we could place our brand. So let me actually create an anchor tag that is a navbar brand. For right now, I'm not going to worry about the link. I just want this to display. Let's just display movies. And it's typically after the header where I use list items to create the menu for the application. We don't need a menu just yet. We'll get to that in the next module. But now let me take this table, and I just want to place it inside of a div that is a Bootstrap container, and then add some classes to the table to make that look a little bit better. So we can say it is a Bootstrap table, and then we could also pick some of these other styles like table condensed or table striped. Well, let's just save what we have so far and see what we get. And just with that little bit of work, we now have a much more presentable user interface, still not very sophisticated, but it certainly looks a little bit better than what we had. And we've also laid a foundation for the next module when we start talking about routing. And we actually need to give the user a menu where they can click on different links to navigate to different sections inside of this application.